He's a self-made man. She built that company from nothing. They did it entirely on their own. It gets thrown around as the highest possible compliment, the ultimate testament to what willpower and effort and determination can produce. The people it gets applied to almost always accept it graciously. It's meant as praise. And the culture has decided it's the most flattering thing you can say about a person who's achieved something real. The phrase isn't accurate. It has never been accurate. And the degree to which people believe it, the degree to which they organize their understanding of success around the myth of the lone builder who put it all together from scratch with no real help from anyone or anything, is exactly the degree to which they misunderstand how successful lives actually work. And that misunderstanding isn't a small thing. It's a practical problem. It leads people to apply their effort in the wrong direction, to measure their progress against the wrong standard, to feel confused and demoralized when the approach the myth recommends fails to produce what the myth promised. The cleaned-up version of how something successful got built is the version that gets told publicly. It has a beginning and a middle and an end. The arc from beginning to end feels logical in the retelling, even when it was anything but logical in the living. The mess gets edited out. The near misses get compressed into brief acknowledgments of difficulty that don't quite capture what the difficulty actually felt like at the time. The moments of real doubt, the periods where the person wasn't sure if what they were building was ever going to work, where the evidence in front of them was genuinely mixed and the outcome was genuinely uncertain. Those moments get condensed into a sentence or two. The audience receives them as charming backstory, not as the real defining feature of the experience that they actually were. What gets lost in that editing matters, not just for the people telling the story, but for the people hearing it. When you hear the cleaned up version of how something successful got built, you absorb a picture of the process that is fundamentally misleading. You absorb the idea that the people who build significant things were always, underneath the surface difficulty, moving toward a destination they could see. That the uncertainty was part of the journey, but never a real threat to the outcome. That the doubt was honest, but the direction was always basically clear. And if that's the picture you're working from when you start building something of your own, you'll be blindsided by the actual experience of it in ways that matter. Because the actual experience of building something real is not a story with a clear arc moving toward an outcome you can see. It's a series of days where you're doing the best you can with incomplete information, in conditions you didn't fully anticipate. And the outcome is genuinely uncertain in ways that no amount of determination or talent fully resolves. The people who get through it and end up on the other side aren't people who avoided the uncertainty. They're people who sat inside it longer than most people are willing to sit, without any certainty about how it was going to resolve, and kept going anyway. The myth of the self-made person does specific damage to the people who try to live by it. It tells them that if the result they want hasn't shown up yet, they aren't trying hard enough, or they aren't doing the right things in the right order. It tells them that the people who succeeded were operating with some kind of certainty they themselves haven't accessed. It tells them that the way to build something is to push harder, force harder, will the outcome into existence through sheer determination. And when that approach doesn't work, which it usually doesn't, not for the most significant kind of result, the person concludes there's something wrong with them, rather than with the framework. But the framework is the problem. The framework was never accurate. Every significant result anyone has ever built is the meeting of three things. And those three things are worth naming clearly, because most people only see one of them at a time and treat that one as the whole picture. The first is a prepared person, someone who has spent the time and effort to develop real capability in a particular area, someone who has built something real in themselves over a long stretch of attention and practice. The second is a need, a moment when the world, or some specific corner of it, requires the kind of capability that person has built. The third is a set of conditions, the timing, the surrounding environment, the larger circumstances that determine whether the meeting between the prepared person and the need can actually happen and produce something at the scale that gets called success. Two of those three are not under anyone's control. The need isn't manufactured by the person who eventually meets it. The need emerges from forces bigger than any one person. Economic shifts, technological changes, cultural movements, the slow turning of the conditions that determine what people are willing to pay for and what kinds of problems they're paying attention to. And the conditions aren't under your control either. The timing of when those needs emerge isn't something you set. The historical moment you're operating in is the one you happen to be born into. The larger landscape of opportunity is shaped by forces you didn't start and can't direct. What this means when you sit with it honestly is that the part of the equation that's yours is exactly one of those three. The preparation. That's the part you control. That's the part you can invest in, develop, improve through deliberate effort over a long period of time. The other two parts will arrive when they arrive, in the form they arrive in. And the only question that matters about your role is whether you'll be ready for them when they do. This is a different way of thinking about success than most people are taught, and it produces a very different relationship to effort. The myth-based version says you create the result through pressure, that you push hard enough in the right direction for long enough and the result appears. The accurate version says you don't create the result, you create the readiness. The result gets created by the meeting between your readiness and conditions you didn't make. Your job is the readiness. The conditions are the world's contribution to the equation, and the world will contribute that on its own schedule. Once you accept this, certain things start to make more sense. When successful people look back at their own success and describe how close it was to not happening, that isn't false modesty. It's accurate observation. They know how dependent the result was on conditions they didn't control. They know which moments could have gone differently and produced a totally different outcome. They know that the meeting between their preparation and the world's need was a real meeting, not a result they engineered. And they're honest about what they brought to it and what they didn't. And here's why patient, deliberate preparation often beats aggressive pursuit of outcomes. Aggressive pursuit assumes you can force the meeting. You can't. You can position yourself near where the meeting might happen. You can develop yourself to the point where, if it happens, you can do something significant with it. But you can't make the world generate the conditions the meeting requires. The world will do that on its own schedule. The person who was patient and prepared when it happened benefits. The person who was aggressively pursuing outcomes in the absence of the actual conditions mostly generates heat without much light. The hard part is that the preparation period, the long stretch where you're developing real capability and the meeting hasn't happened yet, isn't validating the way visible pursuit is validating. It looks, from outside and often from inside too, like nothing is happening. The work you're doing isn't producing measurable results. The accumulation is invisible. In a culture that rewards visible activity, sustaining the patient preparation through that long stretch can feel like failure, even when it's exactly the right investment. Showing up, in the sense that actually matters here, isn't what most people mean when they use the phrase. It isn't physical presence. It isn't attendance. It isn't the act of occupying a seat in a room where something important is happening. People attend things and participate in things and are physically present for things their entire working lives without ever really showing up for any of them. They're there, but they bring nothing to the situation that couldn't have been replaced by the next available person at essentially no cost. That kind of presence is common. It's unremarkable, and it produces unremarkable results. Real showing up is something different. It's the act of bringing the full developed version of yourself to a situation that requires what you've spent serious time building. Not a version of yourself that's performing engagement while reserving the actual energy for somewhere else. Not a version of yourself that's present enough to avoid criticism, but not present enough to contribute anything that couldn't easily be replaced. The full version, the one that's genuinely curious about what's happening, genuinely capable of doing something with the situation, genuinely able to bring something to the meeting that another person in the same room couldn't bring in quite the same way. That kind of showing up is rare, and it's rare because of what it requires. It requires preparation that most people aren't willing to do. It requires the deep, hard-won, often unglamorous work of becoming genuinely competent at something. Not just credentialed in it, not just associated with it, not just able to talk about it, actually capable of producing real results in it when the situation calls for it. The preparation that makes real showing up possible is different from the kind of preparation people often substitute for it. It's the preparation of judgment built through experience. The preparation of having done the thing many times, in many different conditions, and of having watched honestly what worked and what didn't. The preparation of having developed the kind of practical wisdom that only comes from sustained engagement with something over years. This kind of preparation is slow. It doesn't produce visible markers in the short term. It doesn't generate impressive credentials at predictable intervals. It builds quietly through ordinary practice in ways that are hard to point at and harder to perform for an audience. And because of all that, it isn't the kind of preparation the culture of professional life particularly encourages. The culture encourages visible activity, visible credentials, visible affiliations. The patient development of real competence isn't visible until the moment it gets tested, and then suddenly it's very visible. And the gap between the people who did the actual work and the people who did the visible substitute becomes immediately and unmistakably clear. This matters for the question of how to build a career, because the openings when they arrive demand the substance and not the surface. The high-stakes situation that calls for what you've built calls for what you've actually built. It doesn't care what you've arranged to look like. The performance of competence works in low-stakes situations where the people evaluating you can't easily tell performance from substance. It fails reliably in the situations where the substance is what's actually needed. And those are exactly the situations the significant openings present. So there's a question worth sitting with about your own preparation. Are you actually developing the substance? Or are you developing the appearance? Are you doing the slow, patient, often unglamorous work of becoming genuinely capable of something? Or are you doing the faster, more visible work of arranging to look like someone who's genuinely capable of something? The two aren't the same. They feel similar from the inside in some ways, but they produce dramatically different results when the moment comes that requires the real thing rather than the performance of it. There's a version of preparation that's not exactly shortcutting and not exactly substance, and it's worth naming clearly because it consumes enormous amounts of energy that could otherwise go toward actual development. It's the preparation of positioning, the deliberate cultivation of the right associations, the right affiliations, the right signals of belonging to the right communities and conversations. People spend enormous amounts of time on this. They cultivate the relationships, they get into the rooms, they pick up the credentials and the affiliations that signal membership in the relevant tribe. They make sure they're seen at the right places, mentioned in the right contexts, included in the right conversations. From one angle, it looks like serious career investment, and it produces results of a specific kind. It generates introductions, invitations, the surface markers of being someone who matters in a particular world. The trouble is that those results are limited. They get you into rooms. They create the impression of belonging in those rooms. But they don't produce the underlying capability the rooms eventually demand. Then the opening arrives inside the room you worked so hard to get into. And the question gets asked that the opening always eventually asks, what do you actually have to offer? And the positioning has no answer to that. The positioning was the answer to a different question. It was the answer to the question of how to look like someone who belongs. It wasn't the answer to the question of how to actually do the thing. The answer to that second question has to come from somewhere positioning can't reach. It has to come from real preparation, actual development, real time spent getting genuinely good at something the world actually needs. No amount of strategic positioning substitutes for that preparation. You can't arrange your way into capability. You can only build capability the slow way, through the kind of work that no shortcut accommodates. This is why so many people who've aggressively positioned themselves for years find that the openings, when they finally arrive, don't produce what they hoped. They got into the rooms. They cultivated the relationships. They have all the surface markers of someone who should be doing well. And then the moment comes that requires them to actually deliver, to do something that matters with the access they've arranged. And they discover that the access wasn't the same as the capability, that what they'd been building was the appearance of readiness, rather than readiness itself. And here's what's honest to say about this. The people who build the real capability often look for a long time like they're doing less than the people who are aggressively positioning. They're reading, practicing, doing the work carefully, thinking through problems nobody asked them to think through, developing skills in areas where the immediate return isn't visible. From the outside, in the short term, this can look like a lack of ambition, a failure to capitalize, an inability to play the game. From the inside of a career, over the span of a decade or two, it produces a depth of real capability that the positioning-focused approach simply can't produce. Then the moment comes. The opening appears. The situation requires the real thing rather than the performance of it. And the gap between the two paths becomes visible all at once. The prepared person walks through a door the well-positioned person can't walk through. Not because the prepared person is better at presenting themselves, because they've built something the moment actually requires, and the well-positioned person hasn't. That isn't a small difference. That's the entire difference between the careers that compound into something significant and the careers that look impressive for a while and then quietly hit a ceiling that nobody talks about openly. The framework most people operate inside when they're trying to build a successful life is the framework of direct outcome pursuit. You want a result. You apply effort and pressure to producing that result. You measure your progress by how close you're getting to the result. When the result isn't appearing fast enough, you push harder, work longer, force more aggressively, on the assumption that the result is a matter of enough effort applied directly. This framework is popular because it matches the cultural story about willpower and determination, and because it produces results of a certain kind in certain situations. There are outcomes that respond to direct effort. There are situations where pushing harder produces a better result. The framework isn't entirely wrong. It's just incomplete in a way that systematically fails for the most significant kind of result. The most significant kind of result, the kind that comes from the meeting between a prepared person and a moment of real need, can't be produced by pushing. The world doesn't generate its most significant openings in response to one person pushing harder. It generates them in response to its own internal logic, shifts in conditions, changes in what people need, evolutions in what's possible. The person who benefits from those shifts benefits not because they pushed hard enough, but because they were prepared deeply enough to do something real when the shift created the opening. This is hard to absorb because it asks you to redirect effort from the place where it feels productive to the place where it actually compounds. Direct outcome pursuit feels productive. You can see what you're doing. You can measure your activity against the goal. You can feel the daily satisfaction of having pushed hard at something. The patient work of building real capability doesn't feel productive in the same way. It's mostly invisible. It doesn't produce daily evidence of progress. It doesn't generate the satisfying feedback loop that direct pursuit produces. And the person operating from the direct pursuit framework will frequently abandon the patient work and return to the more emotionally satisfying activity of pushing on outcomes that don't actually move in response to pushing. The shift the accurate framework requires is simple but uncomfortable. It moves the primary investment from outcome pursuit to capability development, from the external and largely uncontrollable to the internal and entirely within your influence. The question you ask yourself daily stops being, how do I make something happen, and starts being, am I actually getting better at what I claim to do? Am I building the kind of depth that will let me do something significant when the situation requires it? Am I developing the judgment and the real competence that will make me the right person when the right moment creates the opening? These are questions you can actually answer and act on and measure progress against, even when that progress isn't externally visible. The person who answers them honestly and acts on the answers consistently across the years that real development requires is building something that no amount of outcome pursuit can substitute for. They're building the readiness. They're doing the part of the equation that's theirs to do. And when the conditions eventually shift, the way they always eventually do, that person is positioned to benefit from the shift in a way the outcome pursuer isn't. And here's something the outcome pursuit framework hides that's worth admitting. The outcome pursuit person, when they fail to produce the result, blames themselves for not pushing hard enough. They take it as a verdict on their willpower. The accurate framework reframes the same situation. If the conditions weren't right and you were genuinely prepared, the failure to produce the result is information about the conditions, not about you. Your job was the preparation. You did your job. The world's contribution didn't arrive yet. That doesn't mean you failed. It means the meeting hasn't happened, and the meeting may still happen in a form you can't fully predict if you keep showing up for the preparation in the meantime. There's an ingredient in all of this that almost never gets named directly, and it's one of the most important ingredients in the whole equation. It's genuine curiosity about the work you've committed to. Not curiosity as a personality trait. Not curiosity as a luxury. Curiosity as a strategic resource. Possibly the most important one available to anyone trying to build something that needs sustained effort over years. And here's why curiosity matters so much. It's the only thing that reliably sustains the long preparation period when the external rewards aren't appearing yet. If you're in a field because you calculated it was a good place to be, because somebody told you it offered opportunities, because the rewards looked attractive, those reasons aren't going to get you through the years when the rewards haven't arrived yet. The strategic motivation runs out. The cost-benefit analysis stops looking favorable. The patience the patient work requires exceeds what the strategic reasons can supply. Curiosity is different. The person who's genuinely curious about something does the preparation because the preparation is interesting. The work itself is rewarding. Learning more about the field is satisfying on its own. It doesn't require external validation to keep going. They pay attention to what's happening in the field because the field genuinely fascinates them. They notice the shifts and developments because those shifts and developments are interesting on their own terms, not just as opportunities to be exploited. This kind of curiosity is what gets people through the difficult middle period of any serious career. The period after the initial enthusiasm has worn off, but before the significant rewards have started to arrive. The strategically motivated quit during this period because the calculation has stopped working in their favor. The genuinely curious stay because the calculation was never the point. They were doing the work because they wanted to be doing the work. And the work keeps being interesting whether or not the external rewards are accumulating yet. Across long enough timelines, this difference compounds in a remarkable way. The people who stay in a field long enough to develop real expertise are almost always the ones who were curious enough about it to stay through the periods when staying didn't make strategic sense. The strategically motivated have moved on to whatever looked more promising in the meantime. The genuinely curious have kept building, kept paying attention, kept developing the real capability that the eventual opening will require. When the conditions finally shift in their favor, the people who are still there are the ones who were genuinely curious enough to stay. The market rewards them. The opportunities arrive. The careers compound into something significant. The people who left because the calculations stopped working briefly aren't in position to benefit because they aren't there anymore. And the capability the opening requires takes longer to develop than the time between when they left and when the opening appeared. This is why the advice to find work you genuinely care about isn't soft advice. It's hard, practical, strategic advice. Caring about your work isn't a luxury that sensitive people indulge in while serious people grit through whatever pays the most. Caring about your work is what makes it possible to do the long, patient, slow development that produces real capability. Without that caring, the development period becomes unbearable in ways that aren't always conscious, but are always operating in the background. The person without curiosity is constantly negotiating with themselves about whether to keep going. The person with curiosity is just continuing, because continuing is what they would be doing anyway. So the choice of field matters more than most strategic frameworks acknowledge, not because some fields are objectively better than others, because some fields will sustain your genuine interest across the long timeline real development requires, and some won't. The field that sustains your interest is the field where you can do the patient work, develop the real capability, and still be there when the opening eventually arrives. And that's worth more than choosing a field because it currently looks like a good bet. The looking like a good bet status will fluctuate over the timeline. And the only thing that holds steady through the fluctuations is whether you actually want to be doing the work. The last thing worth saying about all of this is about gratitude, but not gratitude in the sentimental sense. Gratitude as accurate seeing clearly how the result you have was actually produced, what you brought to it, what other people contributed, what the conditions provided, what timing made possible. The myth of the self-made person produces a specific kind of pride that isn't just inaccurate, it's practically costly. The pride that attributes the full outcome to your own effort can't accurately see the ingredients that actually produced the result. And without an accurate read on the ingredients, you can't accurately figure out what to invest in for the next result. The person who believes they did it all themselves doubles down on their own effort, because that's what they think produced the outcome. The person who sees clearly that their preparation met a world that created the conditions invests differently in the preparation, because that's the part they control. And in honest attention to the conditions, because that's where the openings actually emerge. Seeing things clearly opens up something the self-made framework shuts down. It opens up the recognition of what you actually owe to the people and conditions that contributed to your result. The teachers who took the time, the mentors who paid attention, the connectors who made introductions they didn't have to make, the historical moment that happened to favor what you were building. None of those things were guaranteed to you. None of them were earned in the sense the self-made framework implies. They were, to a real degree, gifts you happened to receive. And a serious adult understanding of your own success requires acknowledging them as such. This isn't modesty, it's accuracy, and it's also strategy. Because it produces a specific orientation toward your own future that the self-made pride can't produce. The person who sees clearly what they received tends to want to extend the same to the next generation of people who are in the position they used to be in. They mentor, they connect, they contribute back to the conditions that made their result possible. Not because they're unusually generous, because they understand that the conditions for success aren't self-sustaining. They get reproduced, or they don't get reproduced, by the choices of the people who benefited from them previously. And those choices add up to whether the world that comes after you is one where the next set of prepared people can find their openings. The other thing that accurate seeing produces is durability across multiple openings. The person who understood what actually produced their first significant success is positioned to repeat the pattern. Because they actually understood the pattern, the person who attributed the success entirely to their own willpower is in a worse position the second time, because their understanding of what worked is wrong, and the framework they apply will keep pulling the wrong levers. Successful people who sustain success across multiple cycles are almost always people who understood, as accurately as possible, what actually produced each cycle's result, and who kept investing in the real levers rather than the imagined ones. This combination, full ownership of the preparation, real humility about the conditions, accurate seeing of what each contributed, isn't a compromise between ambition and modesty. It's the most accurate possible understanding of how the process works, and therefore the most productive possible orientation toward continuing to do it well. It produces ambition that doesn't burn itself out pushing on what can't be pushed. It produces humility that doesn't undercut effort by making it feel pointless. It produces the kind of clarity about what actually matters that lets you focus your investment where the investment will compound. Nobody self-made anything. The phrase points at the wrong thing. What people did when they built lives that meant something is they showed up. They prepared seriously when nobody was particularly watching. They paid honest attention to what was happening in the world they'd chosen to develop in. They were genuinely curious about that world for long enough that they were still there when the moment finally came. They were ready when the conditions finally aligned. They walked through the opening that the meeting between their preparation and the world's need created. They were honest enough about what produced the result to keep doing the work that mattered after the first result arrived. That's the full picture. Not the myth, not the self-made story, the actual description of how the things worth building actually get built. And knowing the actual description is the foundation of the only kind of success that's worth working for. The only kind that lasts long enough to mean something. predator in the brush, a drop in the path, a movement at the edge of the field that might be a threat or might be nothing. The system that evolved to handle those situations is fast, automatic, and heavily biased toward avoidance. Because in the environment it was built for, avoiding things that turned out to be nothing was a small cost. And failing to avoid things that turned out to be real was the end. That system is still running inside you. It hasn't been replaced by a more modern version. It hasn't been updated to reflect that the threats you're actually navigating now aren't predators in the brush. The system is doing the same thing it has always done, with the same mechanisms it has always used, and it's still oriented toward the same goal: fast threat response, designed to keep you intact through immediate danger. The trouble is that the situations it's now applying itself to are mostly not situations that call for that kind of response. Most of the important decisions in a modern life don't require speed. They require accuracy. They require considered weighing of long-term outcomes, careful thinking about what you actually value, honest assessment of trade-offs that don't reveal themselves to surface-level analysis. None of these things are what the nervous system is good at. The nervous system is good at fast. It's good at automatic. It's good at noticing threat patterns and responding before the slower parts of your brain have had a chance to think about whether the response is the right one. When the nervous system is allowed to handle a decision it wasn't designed for, it handles that decision the only way it knows how to handle anything: by treating it as a threat management problem. It looks at the situation in front of you and asks, what's the threat here? What's the discomfort here? What's the unknown here? And what's the fastest way to reduce all of those things? That framing isn't a bad framing for a physical emergency. It's a terrible framing for a financial decision, a career choice, a difficult conversation, a long-term commitment, or any of the other complex, slow-moving situations that actually shape a modern life. And this matters in a very concrete way, because the nervous system is in fact handling many of these decisions, in many people. Much of the time, it's handling them with the toolkit it has, which is the toolkit of threat avoidance. Which means, in a very large number of the moments that matter most in a person's life, the decision being made isn't the considered decision the person believes they're making. It's the threat avoidance decision their nervous system was always going to make, dressed up in the appearance of deliberation, validated by reasoning that came after the fact, and was constructed to support a conclusion that had already been reached. This is the central problem with letting the nervous system run decisions it wasn't designed for. It isn't that the nervous system is bad, it's that it's excellent at the wrong job. And when the wrong job is the one it's being applied to, excellence at it produces consistently wrong answers. Not because the system is broken, because it's functioning exactly as designed, in a context where its design is mismatched to what's actually required. The mismatch is the issue, and the mismatch can only be addressed by recognizing it and learning in real time when the system that shouldn't be running the decision is running the decision anyway. The way the nervous system makes decisions when it has them is by reaching the conclusion first and producing the reasoning afterward. This is the part that's hardest to absorb, because it doesn't match the way most people experience their own thinking. Most people experience their thinking as a process, a sequence of considerations that lead to a conclusion. The conclusion arrives at the end of the considerations, and the considerations are what produced it. That isn't actually how it works much of the time. Much of the time, the conclusion has already been reached at a level the conscious mind doesn't have access to, before the conscious mind has even started what it experiences as the deliberation. The deliberation that follows isn't what produced the conclusion. It's what justifies the conclusion that was already there. The justification feels exactly like genuine reasoning, because in some sense it is reasoning. But the reasoning is operating in service of a conclusion that was determined by something other than the reasoning. This is why the same person, in the same situation, with the same available information, can reach different conclusions depending on what state their nervous system happens to be in at the moment of the decision. The information hasn't changed, the arguments haven't changed. What's changed is the underlying state, and the state is the thing that's actually generating the conclusion. The reasoning is window dressing for whatever the state has produced. You can see this in yourself if you pay attention. There are decisions you've made when you were calm that you would have made differently if you'd been agitated. There are decisions you've made when you were tired that you would have made differently if you'd been rested. There are decisions you've made under pressure that look in retrospect like they weren't really decisions at all. They were reactions wearing the costume of decisions. The reasoning was there. The reasoning sounded coherent at the time, but the reasoning was downstream of something the conscious mind didn't control and didn't even fully see. The nervous system reaches its conclusions through a specific mechanism. It scans the situation rapidly for threat patterns. It compares what it's seeing now to what it has seen before. It's looking for matches with situations that previously produced bad outcomes. If it finds a match, it triggers the threat response. The threat response includes everything from physical changes, heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, to cognitive changes that bias the reasoning that follows. Once the threat response is active, the reasoning that comes after it isn't neutral. It's operating inside a frame that's already been set by the threat response. And that frame is the frame of finding ways to reduce the threat or avoid the situation that triggered it. The reasoning operating inside this frame will reliably produce conclusions that serve the threat response. It will find reasons to avoid the situation, even when the situation doesn't actually warrant avoidance. It will find reasons to delay action, even when delay is the worst choice. It will find reasons to choose the familiar option, even when the familiar option isn't what would actually serve you. The reasoning isn't lying. It's just operating from a starting position that was set by something other than itself. And the starting position determines what conclusions can be reached. This is the move that has to be made if you want to start operating from your brain rather than from your nervous system. You have to recognize that the reasoning you're doing is happening inside a frame, that the frame was set by something prior to the reasoning, that the frame can sometimes be an honest one and sometimes be a threat response one, and that the reasoning itself doesn't tell you which kind of frame it's operating inside. You have to look at the frame, not just at the reasoning. Looking at the frame is a different skill than reasoning, one that almost nobody has been taught directly, one that has to be developed through deliberate practice over time. What reactive decisions actually look like in real life isn't always obvious, because most of them don't feel reactive in the moment. They feel like reasonable responses to the situation. They feel like the conclusion any thinking person would reach. The reactive nature only becomes visible afterward, when the heat has cooled, and the situation can be looked at without the threat response coloring the analysis. The argument that escalated faster than the situation warranted is one common shape. A small disagreement at work, a minor friction in a relationship, a comment that landed wrong. And somehow within minutes, the conversation has moved from the original topic to something much larger and much more emotional. The escalation didn't happen because the original topic deserved escalation. It happened because something in the early exchange triggered a threat response, and the response demanded a level of engagement that was disproportionate to the actual stakes. The reasoning produced afterward will explain why the escalation was justified. But the reasoning isn't the source of the escalation. The opportunity that was passed on because something felt off is another shape. A potential job, a potential business move, a potential relationship. The thing was, by every reasonable measure, a good fit. The terms were favorable. The timing seemed right. But there was something, a feeling, a sense that this wasn't quite the one. On the basis of that feeling, the opportunity was declined, and the reasoning got constructed afterward to explain why declining was the right move. The reasoning will be coherent. It will sound like wisdom. It will involve specific concerns about the opportunity that, examined honestly, are concerns that would apply to any opportunity at that same level. The decline wasn't produced by the concerns. The decline was produced by the threat response, and the concerns were assembled afterward to support it. The retreat dressed up as wisdom is the most common shape of all, and the hardest to see. A project that was begun with energy slowly loses that energy and gets quietly shelved, with explanations about timing and priorities and the need to focus on what matters most. A relationship that had real possibility gets backed away from, with explanations about not being ready or not being sure or wanting to take time to be certain. A difficult conversation that needs to happen keeps not happening, with explanations about waiting for the right moment that never quite arrives. In each case, the explanation sounds reasonable. In each case, the explanation is the reasoning produced after the nervous system had already decided to retreat. There's also the financial reactive decision, which often takes the form of either holding too tightly or spending too freely, depending on what state the nervous system is responding to. The person who grew up with money scarcity may, when they encounter abundance, find ways to spend it down to a level that feels familiar. The person who feels insecure about their worth may make purchases that perform a status they don't yet feel. The person under stress may make impulsive financial decisions that produce immediate relief from the discomfort of feeling out of control. None of these decisions are made by the rational financial planner. They're made by the nervous system in response to states it's trying to manage. And the financial reasoning that comes with them is the after-the-fact justification. What all these reactive decisions have in common is that they happen below the level of awareness. And the person making them doesn't experience them as reactive while they're happening. They experience them as choices. They experience the reasoning as their own honest analysis. They have no felt sense that anything other than careful thought is at work. And in many cases, by the time the truth becomes visible, usually long after the decision has already produced its consequences, the situation has moved on, and the lesson is hard to apply forward, because the next reactive decision is going to look just as much like a reasoned choice as this one did. The first step in interrupting this pattern is recognizing that it exists, not in the abstract. Most people will agree that it exists in principle, but in their own life, in their own pattern of decisions, in the specific shapes their reactive decisions tend to take. Until you can identify the patterns in your own behavior, you can't interrupt them. You'll keep mistaking the threat response for genuine analysis, and the decisions that come from it will keep accumulating into a life that was shaped by something other than what you actually wanted. The cost of letting the nervous system run your decisions isn't paid in dramatic blow-ups most of the time. It's paid in the slow, quiet accumulation of choices that weren't the right ones, each of them small enough that no single one feels like a problem. All of them together adding up to a life that's meaningfully different from the one you would have built if your decisions had come from a different source. The career that stayed smaller than it could have been is one form this accumulation takes. The decision to take the safer role rather than the riskier one. The decision to ask for less than what the work was worth. The decision to defer the move that might have led somewhere bigger because the timing didn't feel right yet. Each of these decisions in isolation looked sensible. The reasoning was sound. The risk was avoided. And avoiding risk is generally not framed as a failure. But across a career, the consistent pattern of choosing the lower risk option means the upside that was available never got accessed, and the career that got built was the lower risk version of the career, rather than the version the person was actually capable of. The relationships that stayed at the surface are another form, the conversations that didn't happen because the discomfort of having them was high, the vulnerability that wasn't extended because the threat response said it wasn't safe, the honesty that got withheld because the nervous system flagged it as a risk. Each moment of withholding seemed fine in context. The relationship continued. Nothing was visibly damaged, But the relationship that accumulated across thousands of those small moments of not quite honesty and not quite vulnerability is a different relationship than the one that would have been built if those moments had been handled differently. The depth that was possible never got reached. Because reaching it required moves the nervous system kept blocking, one small block at a time. The version of things that never materialized is maybe the most painful form, because it's the one you can't see. You can look at the career you have and the relationships you have and recognize their actual shape. You can't easily look at the career and relationships you would have had if the nervous system hadn't been running so much of the decision-making. That version of your life doesn't exist anywhere you can compare it to the actual one. It exists only as a quiet, ambient sense in some part of you that something is missing, that there's a gap between who you are and what you've built that you can't quite name precisely. But that's real, and that you feel. This is the most common form the cost takes, not a dramatic loss, not a specific failure. A diffuse, persistent sense that the life being lived is smaller than the capacity that produced it, that the decisions made along the way, while individually defensible, added up to something less than what they should have, that the person who was making the decisions wasn't really making them. They were being managed by something quieter and more automatic, something that valued discomfort reduction more than the long-term shape of the life it was building. The person who's lived inside this pattern for a long time often doesn't realize that the pattern itself is the source of the dissatisfaction. They look at specific failures and try to fix them. They blame circumstances, or other people, or the absence of opportunities they think would have made the difference. They miss the underlying mechanism, which is that decision after decision, year after year, was being made by a system that wasn't aligned with what they actually wanted. The dissatisfaction is the cumulative result of that misalignment, not the result of any specific event that can be pointed to and fixed. What makes this hard to address is that the alignment problem is invisible from the inside as long as the nervous system is running. The reasoning the nervous system produces always feels like reasonable analysis. The conclusions it reaches always feel like the right ones. The accumulation of small reactive decisions doesn't feel like an accumulation while it's happening. It only becomes visible when you look back with enough distance and see the shape that all those individually sensible choices have produced. And by then, many of them can't be undone. The only available move is to interrupt the pattern going forward by changing how the next decisions get made. If you're going to interrupt the pattern, the first practical skill you have to develop is the ability to recognize in real time when your nervous system is the one running the decision. This is harder than it sounds, because the nervous system doesn't announce itself. It doesn't raise its hand and say, "I'm the one talking now." It blends seamlessly into your normal experience of thinking. And the only way to tell the difference is by paying attention to specific signals that, with practice, become reliable indicators of which system is in charge. The first signal is in the body. When the nervous system is running, the body is in some kind of activated state. There's tension somewhere, in the chest, in the gut, in the shoulders, in the jaw. There's a slight elevation in heart rate. There's a quality of urgency in the felt sense of the situation that doesn't match the actual urgency the situation requires. These body signals aren't always loud. They can be subtle, but they're always there when the nervous system is engaged. And learning to notice them is one of the most reliable ways to identify, in real time, that something other than calm thinking is currently producing your conclusions. The second signal is in the texture of the thinking itself. When the nervous system is running, the thinking has a specific quality. It feels urgent. It feels like a conclusion needs to be reached now. It feels like the situation can't remain unresolved, that something has to be done, that the discomfort of not yet knowing what to do is itself the problem. Calm thinking doesn't have this quality. Calm thinking can sit with not yet knowing. It can hold an open question without demanding immediate closure. And that pressure to resolve quickly is one of the most reliable indicators that the nervous system has taken over the decision. The third signal is in the conclusions themselves. The nervous system tends to reach conclusions that share a particular character. They're oriented toward avoidance, retreat, the familiar option, the choice that minimizes immediate discomfort. If you notice that your reasoning across a wide range of situations keeps producing conclusions of this same character, that pattern is information. It doesn't mean every conclusion is wrong, but the consistency of the pattern across genuinely different situations suggests that something other than the situations themselves is producing the conclusions. The nervous system has a signature, and the signature is detectable across long enough timelines. The fourth signal is in how the thinking responds to challenge. When you push back on a conclusion the nervous system has produced, when you argue against it from the strongest possible counter position, the response from the nervous system is different from the response of genuine reasoning. Genuine reasoning engages with the counter, considers it, sometimes updates the conclusion. Nervous system reasoning concedes the specific point and immediately produces another argument for the same conclusion. It doesn't let go of the conclusion no matter what's brought against it, because the conclusion wasn't arrived at through reasoning in the first place. The reasoning is window dressing. The conclusion is fixed by the underlying state. And the reasoning will keep finding ways to support it, no matter what counters appear. There are also specific conditions that make reactive decisions more likely. Tiredness is a major one. When the body is depleted, the nervous system has more influence, because the slower brain functions that would normally check it are weaker. Hunger is another. Stress accumulated from unrelated situations is a third. Strong emotion of any kind, even positive, can shift the balance toward reactive processing. When you notice that you're in any of these states, the appropriate response is not to make significant decisions. Or, if a decision has to be made, to bring extra scrutiny to it. To assume that whatever conclusion you reach is more likely than usual to be a nervous system conclusion rather than a considered one. Learning to recognize the signals takes time, and you'll get it wrong many times before you start getting it right. The signals aren't always clear. The states aren't always obvious. But each time you catch yourself, in real time, in the middle of a reactive process, and pause and recognize what's happening, and let the decision wait until you're in a different state, you build the capacity to do it again. The capacity grows with practice. And once it's genuinely there, it changes the quality of every decision you make for the rest of your working life. The most important interruption available to anyone trying to make decisions deliberately is the pause. It sounds almost too simple to matter. A pause. A small gap between the impulse and the response, between the nervous system's conclusion and the action that would carry it out. But everything that's been said so far comes down to whether or not you can actually do this one thing. Insert a pause where the nervous system would otherwise have driven straight through to action. The pause isn't long. It doesn't have to be. A few seconds sometimes. A few minutes when more is needed. The point of the pause isn't to think more carefully during it. Exactly. The point is to break the chain. The nervous system's process is fast and continuous. Stimulus, threat assessment, conclusion, action. If the chain is unbroken, the action happens. And the action is the nervous system's action. If the chain is broken, even briefly, something else has a chance to engage. The slower brain comes online. The reasoning that was going to happen anyway gets to happen with more space. The decision that gets made isn't necessarily different from the one the nervous system would have made. Sometimes the nervous system was right, but now it's actually a decision rather than a reflex. The pause isn't the same as procrastination. Procrastination is the indefinite deferral of a decision because the decision is uncomfortable to make. The pause is a brief and bounded interruption that lets the decision be made from a different state. Procrastination has no specific exit point. It continues until something forces resolution. The pause has a specific exit point. When you've actually engaged the slower brain and the decision can be made deliberately. Procrastination is itself often produced by the nervous system as a way of avoiding decisions that feel threatening. The pause is the opposite. It's the way of making decisions that the nervous system would otherwise drive without permission. Building the pause into your actual practice is the harder part. Knowing about it isn't enough. Most people, when they first hear this idea, agree with it intellectually and then immediately go back to making decisions the way they always have. Because the pause didn't happen automatically, and they didn't yet have the habit of inserting it. The habit has to be built deliberately, in low-stakes situations, before it can be relied on in high-stakes ones. You practice in conversations that don't matter much. You practice in small daily decisions. You practice in moments where the pause is available and the cost of pausing is low. Each time you do it, the habit gets a little stronger. Each time you don't, the old reactive pattern gets a little more reinforced. The signal that tells you the pause is needed is the same set of signals that tells you the nervous system is engaged. The body signals, the urgency texture, the sense that something has to happen now. Whenever you notice those signals, that's the moment to pause. Not always to decide differently. Sometimes the decision the nervous system was about to make turns out to be the right one. But to pause, to engage the slower brain, to let the decision get made by both systems together, rather than by the faster one alone. The decision that comes from this combined process isn't always different from the reactive one, but it's more reliably right, more often, across a wide range of situations. The most useful question to ask during the pause is a simple one. What am I trying to avoid right now? The answer reveals what the nervous system is responding to, which is often different from what the conscious mind thinks the situation is about. The conscious mind thinks the situation is about the specific decision in front of you. The nervous system is often responding to something underneath that, something familiar from earlier experiences, something that's being triggered by a feature of the current situation that resembles a previous one. Naming what's being avoided in the pause is one of the most reliable ways to separate what the situation actually is from what the nervous system is treating it as. The pause, used consistently across years, changes the quality of a life. Not all at once, not in dramatic, visible ways at first. Cumulatively, decision by decision, the pattern of decisions that result from a life with pauses is meaningfully different from the pattern of decisions that result from a life of unbroken reactive responses. The career compounds differently. The relationships develop differently. The version of the life that gets built is closer to the version the conscious self would have chosen, because the conscious self was actually present for the choices, rather than being narrated by a nervous system that had already decided what was going to happen. Operating from the brain rather than from the nervous system isn't a permanent state, and anyone who tells you it can be is either lying or selling something. The nervous system isn't going away. It's not going to be replaced by some calmer version of itself that doesn't produce reactive responses. As long as you have a body, the body's going to keep generating threat responses, and those responses are going to keep trying to take over decisions in situations that resemble, even loosely, the situations the system was originally designed to handle. The goal isn't to get rid of the nervous system. The goal is to learn when it's running and when it isn't, and to make sure the decisions you actually care about are made when it isn't. This is more selective than it sounds. Most of the decisions you make in a day don't particularly matter. The system that picks where to sit, what to order, when to send a routine email, that system can run on autopilot most of the time, and the autopilot does fine. The decisions that matter are a smaller subset. The choices about direction, the hard conversations, the financial decisions of any size. the relational decisions that are going to shape something long-term, the professional decisions that are going to set trajectory. For these decisions, the question of which system is running becomes worth paying attention to specifically. The practice of bringing the brain online for the decisions that matter isn't the practice of being calm at all times. It's the practice of recognizing which decisions are the ones where the difference between brain-driven and nervous system-driven outcomes is going to matter most, and making sure those specific decisions are made from the right state. This is more achievable than the alternative, and it's more honest about the limits of what's possible. You can't be in optimal state for every moment of your life. You can be in optimal state for the specific moments that matter most, if you know how to identify them, and if you've built the habit of waiting for the state when it isn't there yet. The identification is part of the skill. Most people don't actively distinguish between high stakes and low stakes decisions. They make all decisions at the same level of attention, which means they burn energy they don't need to burn on small decisions and don't have enough left for the large ones. The person who has internalized that some decisions require more care can budget their attention accordingly. They make the small decisions efficiently, conserving energy. They invest the energy they save in the decisions that actually matter, treating those decisions with the kind of seriousness and deliberateness that produces good outcomes. The deliberateness involves more than the pause, though the pause is the entry point. It involves bringing actual attention to what you value, what trade-offs you're willing to make, what the long-term implications of the choice actually are. It involves checking your reasoning against the patterns you know your nervous system tends to produce, and asking whether the conclusion you're reaching has the signature of a considered conclusion or of a reactive one in disguise. It involves sometimes sitting with the discomfort of not yet knowing what to do, until the slower process produces something the faster process can't. What this looks like in practice across a life isn't dramatic. The person who's operating this way doesn't look like a different person to anyone watching. They're not performing wisdom. They're not announcing that they're making careful decisions. They're just living, making choices, doing the things that need to be done. The difference is internal, and it's in the quality of the choices, not in their visibility. They're making choices they actually stand behind, that reflect what they actually value, that aren't the byproducts of a system that was scared of something it never had to identify out loud. The choices accumulate, the life accumulates, and the life that gets built from this practice over years is meaningfully different from the life that gets built from the alternative. This isn't a one-time accomplishment, it's a practice. You'll do it well sometimes and poorly other times. You'll catch the nervous system in the act sometimes and miss it entirely other times. The point isn't to do it perfectly. The point is to do it more often than you used to, and more reliably for the decisions that matter most, and to keep building the capacity over the course of your working life. So the choices you make in your 40s are made by a more developed version of this skill than the choices you made in your 20s. The work is real. It won't finish, but the work is the thing. The work is what separates a life that was shaped by a system that wasn't designed for the situations it was making decisions in, from a life that was shaped by a person who was actually there for the choices. That separation isn't small. It's the difference between a life that was lived and a life that was managed by something the person never asked to be in charge. Make the choice to be there for the decisions that matter. Build the practice of the pause. Recognize the signals. The rest follows from that, slowly and unevenly. Across the many years a working life takes to build, it's the only work that actually changes the outcome. what the nervous system is responding to, which is often different from what the conscious mind thinks the situation is about. The conscious mind thinks the situation is about the specific decision in front of you. The nervous system is often responding to something underneath that, something familiar from earlier experiences, something that's being triggered by a feature of the current situation that resembles a previous one. Naming what's being avoided in the pause is one of the most reliable ways to separate what the situation actually is from what the nervous system is treating it as. The pause, used consistently across years, changes the quality of a life. Not all at once, not in dramatic, visible ways at first. Cumulatively, decision by decision, the pattern of decisions that result from a life with pauses is meaningfully different from the pattern of decisions that result from a life of unbroken reactive responses. The career compounds differently. The relationships develop differently. The version of the life that gets built is closer to the version the conscious self would have chosen, because the conscious self was actually present for the choices, rather than being narrated by a nervous system that had already decided what was going to happen. Operating from the brain rather than from the nervous system isn't a permanent state, and anyone who tells you it can be is either lying or selling something. The nervous system isn't going away. It's not going to be replaced by some calmer version of itself that doesn't produce reactive responses. As long as you have a body, the body's going to keep generating threat responses, and those responses are going to keep trying to take over decisions in situations that resemble, even loosely, the situations the system was originally designed to handle. The goal isn't to get rid of the nervous system. The goal is to learn when it's running and when it isn't, and to make sure the decisions you actually care about are made when it isn't. This is more selective than it sounds. Most of the decisions you make in a day don't particularly matter. The system that picks where to sit, what to order, when to send a routine email, that system can run on autopilot most of the time, and the autopilot does fine. The decisions that matter are a smaller subset. The choices about direction, the hard conversations, the financial decisions of any size, the relational decisions that are going to shape something long-term, the professional decisions that are going to set trajectory. For these decisions, the question of which system is running becomes worth paying attention to specifically. The practice of bringing the brain online for the decisions that matter isn't the practice of being calm at all times. It's the practice of recognizing which decisions are the ones where the difference between brain-driven and nervous system-driven outcomes is going to matter most, and making sure those specific decisions are made from the right state. This is more achievable than the alternative, and it's more honest about the limits of what's possible. You can't be in optimal state for every moment of your life. You can be in optimal state for the specific moments that matter most, if you know how to identify them, and if you've built the habit of waiting for the state when it isn't there yet. The identification is part of the skill. Most people don't actively distinguish between high-stakes and low-stakes decisions. They make all decisions at the same level of attention, which means they burn energy they don't need to burn on small decisions and don't have enough left for the large ones. The person who has internalized that some decisions require more care can budget their attention accordingly. They make the small decisions efficiently, conserving energy. They invest the energy they save in the decisions that actually matter, treating those decisions with the kind of seriousness and deliberateness that produces good outcomes. The deliberateness involves more than the pause, though the pause is the entry point. It involves bringing actual attention to what you value, what trade-offs you're willing to make, what the long-term implications of the choice actually are. It involves checking your reasoning against the patterns you know your nervous system tends to produce, and asking whether the conclusion you're reaching has the signature of a considered conclusion or of a reactive one in disguise. It involves sometimes sitting with the discomfort of not yet knowing what to do, until the slower process produces something the faster process can't. What this looks like in practice across a life isn't dramatic. The person who's operating this way doesn't look like a different person to anyone watching. They're not performing wisdom. They're not announcing that they're making careful decisions. They're just living, making choices, doing the things that need to be done. The difference is internal, and it's in the quality of the choices, not in their visibility. They're making choices they actually stand behind, that reflect what they actually value, that aren't the byproducts of a system that was scared of something it never had to identify out loud. The choices accumulate, the life accumulates, and the life that gets built from this practice over years is meaningfully different from the life that gets built from the alternative. This isn't a one-time accomplishment, it's a practice. You'll do it well sometimes and poorly other times. You'll catch the nervous system in the act sometimes and miss it entirely other times. The point isn't to do it perfectly. The point is to do it more often than you used to, and more reliably for the decisions that matter most, and to keep building the capacity over the course of your working life. So the choices you make in your 40s are made by a more developed version of this skill than the choices you made in your 20s. The work is real. It won't finish, but the work is the thing. The work is what separates a life that was shaped by a system that wasn't designed for the situations it was making decisions in, from a life that was shaped by a person who was actually there for the choices. That separation isn't small. It's the difference between a life that was lived and a life that was managed by something the person never asked to be in charge. Make the choice to be there for the decisions that matter. Build the practice of the pause. Recognize the signals. The rest follows from that, slowly and unevenly. Across the many years a working life takes to build, it's the only work that actually changes the outcome.
I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. I train my body daily with discipline and respect for long-term health. I am becoming a capable managing director who understands business. I am building long-term financial stability through competence and integrity. I act with gratitude, humility, and a commitment to give back. I am becoming someone who does high-intensity interval training every single week. I take time to recognize what I am grateful for every day. I visualize success every day so I know what I'm moving towards. I begin each day with discipline, clear purpose, integrity, and gratitude. I focus only on what I can influence, and I take deliberate action daily. I reflect, journal, and learn from each day so I improve tomorrow. I learn and teach every day, sharpening my judgment and understanding. I show up intentionally as a husband, a father, a son, and a brother. I take responsibility for the impact of my decisions on others. Day 140.
99.2.